You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hey, everybody. Glad to have you again on Leadership Powered by Common Sense. This is Thorpe, and I hope a great day, or maybe you're just getting started with yours, however you tend to grab our show and do your work. But I'm really excited today. We are, for the first time on record officially on this show, we're going to get into the topic of sustainability and innovation. And my guest has an interesting crossroad story of those two themes and topics, and she's going to share that with us. Her name is Vanessa Thompson. Vanessa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Vanessa has a great background and career in the work toward sustainability. And if I may, Vanessa, this is going to sound really, 101-ish, but tell us your definition of sustainability. What's that all about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say also, just to preface this, that, my background is really in Silicon Valley within startups, entrepreneurship, and finance. And that's really how I got into this. And really seeing that there's so much overlap between thinking sustainably and thinking successfully long-term as a business owner. And I would actually define sustainability in a similar way to actually Larry Fink, who really kind of grew a lot of sustainable investments on Wall Street and really gained a lot of popularity on what was, formerly ESG and now kind of sustainability and clean tech. And he really talked about it in terms of longevity. And that's how I also agree with it too. It's really about thinking about longevity in your business. And that's really where you see that business benefit as well as the sustainability benefit. For example, pension funds are one of the biggest investments in solar. They invested in solar back in the 1980s and 70s, not because necessarily they were interested in sustainability or that was part of their investment strategy, but it was what became the most sense for their portfolio because they were thinking long term, right? So any fund that thinks long term is automatically thinking about sustainability because it inherently makes business sense. And now more so than ever, it's really on an annual basis rather than a quarterly basis. So it's not about thinking 10 years out anymore. We're thinking about how do you protect your facility? How do you protect your business in the next year when all of these major storms are coming through, right? It's really a risk management strategy now because now we're really facing the effects of it. So as a business leader, it's really important to be thinking about a year. That's really kind of where you see the benefit of innovation investment as well as sustainability investment. How are you going to protect your buildings from storms? How are you going to protect them from fires? How are you going to protect them from all these natural disasters that are coming through? You have to be thinking about that on an annual basis. And Larry Fink, one of the things that he really advocates for is moving away from this quarterly reporting system towards a more annual reporting system, because that's when you see the benefits of innovation. It's when you see the investments in human beings and in leadership. You often have to invest a year before you see the results. It's also when you see the results of sustainability as well. So I would define it as really about thinking about the long term.
Well, you packed a lot in there, and I guess one of the quick ones I'm going to jump on, and putting our collective finance hats on. You've got your own experience in the finance realm. I'm an old recovering banker. The notion of that quarterly reporting, that's the point I want to jump on. And I can't tell you how many discussions I've had in boardrooms and other places about the perils of getting so locked down on that 90-day window in that horizon, and foregoing long-term growth and profitability, and now what we call sustainability for the sake of that quick return for the quarter, just so that Wall Street stays happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's something that's actually countering a lot of innovation work in businesses as well, too. I mean, innovation's inherently something that's part of every executive's life, that they have to be investing in this. We see that, in the 1950s, it was that a Fortune 500 company would stay on that list for around 65 years. And now it's about, 14 years and about one company gets kicked off every 2 weeks. So markets are inherently more competitive. We have to be thinking about that this way. And so, we need to be thinking about kind of innovation and sustainability as part of our businesses. And in order to do that, I think we have to start thinking in kind of that annual basis in order to see a lot of those returns.
It's funny and somewhat serendipitous. Yesterday in some research work I was doing, I ran across a video clip of Jeff Bezos on the Jay Leno show one night.
Oh.
And this was back when Bezos still had hair and Amazon was still losing millions and millions of dollars every day.
Right.
And Leno hit him up about it. He said, well, what's up with that? How are you doing that? What is going on? And Bezos just kind of laughed it off. And he said, yeah, we're in it for the long term. He said, the P&Ls we're reporting are negative because we've plowed everything into growth and advancement.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that hit me because even at the time I had kind of forgotten about or not thought about in a long time that whole story. But that is a true fact that it wasn't that they were literally losing money because they had bad products or bad ideas, but they were diverting anything that looked like a spend that they could into the future of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, it's something that I've talked about in a lot of my speeches, which is that scale is the number one priority for a lot of these technologies. When we're investing in innovation or when we're investing in clean tech, scale is the number one priority. We need to be prioritizing scale more than anything else. And that's what really fuels innovation, more so than even that quarterly reporting that we talked about. And, even the case studies that I've written about in my book, I've written over 60 case studies of successful businesses that have transitioned to become more innovative. Oftentimes, they're thinking about scale more than anything else. One of the case studies, I'll just give an example here, is Barry Callebaut. Barry Callebaut is actually one of the world's largest chocolate producers and culinary producers in the world. They produce 1 in every 5 bites of chocolate and then supply to some more commonly known consumer brands after that. And as chocolate has a very dirty story, and it's a very traditional business. It's not necessarily a very innovative one. And so they really went on the ground and they took their time to really understand the plant. And they realized that they were actually throwing out a huge amount of their product, or a huge amount of their actual supply. Around the cacao bean, there's this beautiful cacao fruit. It's about 70% of the cacao bean. They were just throwing it away. And they really took their time to figure this out. Once they realized that there was this valuable fruit that they had been producing this whole time, they actually found out they could make cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, different culinary products, and ended up expanding their range of products and business services into so many markets. And that took, a few years of R&D to really invest the time to do that. But it was really an incredible invention. It's totally changed the chocolate market. So when we're thinking about, companies from any industry, it really does take a certain amount of vision. It takes, the ability to think about scale. And it also takes, it takes a few years to really have those breakthrough technologies that redefine markets.
Not at all directly related, but for some reason it really reminds me, and this is going back in decades in the business world, but I as a banker, I was on the front edge when the whole ATM phenomenon was hitting the street. And here locally where I was part of a large regional bank. We were competing heavily with another regional bank literally just down the street from us in downtown Houston. And our team internally, they were supposed to be the forward thinkers. They put together a package to go to our chairman and our board that said, we needed to invest in this ATM technology. We needed to get going. So they did their classic, analysis and projections and all that, and made the big presentation. And I'll never forget, I was in the room the day it happened. Our chairman shook his head and said, "Not today, boys. We're not going to do this." And everybody kind of went, "What?" It's kind of like, it's coming. We've got to be there. And he said, "No." And 2 years later, our competitor had gone all in on it and basically just gotten hosed in the whole thing. And it was the classic, the pioneers have the arrows in the back, that kind of scenario.
Yeah.
And at that point, we entered the market, and we entered it in a big way, because what had been proven by all these early pioneers was that it didn't work if you didn't have some central technology switching capability for the communication part of the transaction. And they had overlooked that element of the business model. So we plowed all of our investment into building the switch. And we put together a consortium of banks that each had minor stakes in the venture. And for anyone who can remember, back in the day, we became the Pulse Switch. That was the name of it. And the significance of which switch you were a part of has all gone away, because all that technology has leapfrogged and matured and evolved. But back in the day, it was a big deal to know which switch you were a part of, because that defined the geo footprint that you could take your card and go get money at a bank. And we made millions and millions of dollars running the switch.
Interesting.
And it wasn't just about us having boxes in locations with our brand on it, but it was being the backbone to the whole enterprise.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's really visionary on your guys' part, because I know that there's, the famous expression, it's not safe to play it safe anymore. And you have to continually disrupt yourself and go along with where disruption is in the market.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Well, can you, is there such a thing in all your case studies that you did? Are there two polar opposites somewhere in there that you can talk about?
Polar opposites
of the story?
Yeah. I think so. There's one really big, I think, transition case study, and I think this is particularly interesting because a lot of businesses are in this particular crux where they need to be more innovative, they need to be thinking more forward thinking, but they just don't know how. They don't know how to implement that. And I think Interface is a really good example of this. They're actually a commercial carpet manufacturer out of Georgia. This is not the face of what you think of as the most innovative business in the United States. This is a very traditional business. And traditionally, they were actually a huge polluter as well, too. They had actually lobbied a lot of U.S. representatives to actually allow them to pollute in a lot of ways. So they really made a huge transition to becoming one of the most innovative and sustainable businesses in the United States. And of course, that was mainly due to Ray Anderson, their CEO, back in the 1990s, who said, we're going to become restorative. We're going to become the disruptors in the market, where we're actually going to be thinking entirely circular about every single one of our products, which at the time was scientifically possible, but not economically possible. And he was the one who really made that possible. And what was interesting is that he really thought very innovatively about his products. And I'll give one example of one of their patents, because I think it's super interesting. They were trying to remove a lot of their toxic glue from the carpets that glue these carpets to the floor, because it was really bad for human health. It was bad for the environment. And again, they were trying to really think disruptively through that kind of mindset of sustainability and innovation. And they realized they needed to look to nature. They needed to look at biomimicry as their source of disruption. And they found that a gecko's hand actually can climb up a wall without any glue at all. So they mimicked that gecko hand at the bottom of their carpeting and glued it to the ground and created that suction necessary and removed out the glue, the toxic glue, which was one great because they didn't have to purchase glue anymore. And cost is everything in the carpet business. So they were actually able to reduce their prices and undercut their competitors, which was incredible and actually helped them survive a few recessions when their competitors didn't. But then the other thing too is they had this added benefit that it's healthier for you. Customers really liked that there wasn't anything toxic in their material as their competitors were. And then they also really invested with their suppliers. They really actually changed a lot of their suppliers, thought very innovatively with this. They had a huge supplier at the time that they actually ended their work with and created a smaller supplier that they worked with to create a new patent that actually used fishing nets that are in the ocean and recycled them into their fabrics and their polyester that's used in their carpeting. And so they thought really innovatively, and they disrupted a lot of their establishment in the market. But it's because they disrupted that establishment that they actually survived a few recessions. So I think they're a particularly interesting case study in this polar opposite view, where you go from not being innovative at all, being this mid-cap stock. They're already publicly traded, right? And then transitioning to becoming a very disruptive business after already going public. I think that's a particularly, interesting case study.
It's interesting you mentioned them. I'm actually doing some work there myself, and am working with several of their executive leaders on
Oh,
some
interesting.
leadership things, and that their whole vision of sustainability and the ongoing effort to even push it further and refine it further is very much woven into their DNA as a company now.
Yeah.
It's very much part of their culture and their thinking, and it's definitely a very interesting story.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's of course the documentary that's coming out about them. I think it just came out this past summer as well too, because there's such a fascinating case study. I think a lot of people are fascinated with what they've accomplished.
Yeah, and in the in the look at I know from where I sit, it's the dichotomy of a long-standing brand,
Mhm.
a company that was founded a long time ago, and it's gone through the whole generational evolution and then going public and all of that, and to be the company they are now, and of course a lot of their client base is well, they're global, but the big innovators in Silicon Valley are big users because they appreciate
Yeah,
what's being done with the product and the
yeah,
strategy.
yeah,
So there's an appeal to the product. It's like, well, I need carpet in my new 3 million
right.
square foot facility,
Hmm.
and who are you going to go to? Do you want somebody that's using the old glue down toxic
Yeah,
stuff, or you want to find
yeah,
somebody that's on the ESG wagon
yeah.
about Greenpeace and climate and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also this notion of kind of moving away from thinking that, necessarily that innovation or innovation teams are solely within, tech companies at Silicon Valley. Any industry can be completely a disruptor and a leader in this regard. You don't have to come from a particular sector to be an innovator. And I think this is true with a lot of the case studies we have in the book. We had one other case study, which was TaskUs, which was actually a call center. You don't think of call centers to be highly innovative. Normally, you're just trying to get the lowest cost labor you possibly can to answer the most calls, that kind of thing. And TaskUs actually, really was innovative in this regard, investing in their people. Even people who were not necessarily college educated, who, didn't come from that traditional, I think what you think of as, the brilliant kids from Stanford in their mom's garage, coming up with this brilliant, innovative idea, they invested in them and actually gave them the highest salaries in the market. They gave them time to work on pro bono work. They invested in them hugely. And they ended up creating so many innovation teams within even, the customer service business with call centers that they actually were able to lower their costs because they invested so much in innovation that they were more successful. So there's this really interesting kind of pivot, I think, that's happening with a lot of people where they're starting to see that innovation can be in any sector. It can also be within any team. It doesn't have to be the engineering team always, right? It can be in any particular department. And starting to think that way is probably the only way that we can survive in this competitive market going forward.
So let's get back kind of front and center on our key theme here on this show, leadership. What is
Yeah.
different about the business leaders who are driving this innovation and change?
Hmm.
What is it about them? Is it a mindset? Is it a
Yeah.
theology? Is it what is it that makes them different and able to execute on these great things?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of them is really a surprising one, which is listening. And I think that's something that we kind of overlook oftentimes. But oftentimes, when we have these kind of moon mission type visions where we see, we're going to become the leader in the market, we're going to become the biggest disruptor, oftentimes there's actually a huge amount of listening that happens to all their stakeholders. This is not just to their employees, but to their entire stakeholder base. When we even just look back at the case study of Barry Callebaut, for example, the executives actually went on the ground and actually had dinner with all the farmers. They actually met with them, they listened to them, and it was the farmers who understood the tree. They understood that you could make so many different things from different parts of the tree. You could make liqueurs and juices and all these different products, right? So it was because they really took the time to listen to people on the ground that they came up with these innovative ideas. They would have never come up with them if they were just talking to themselves in a boardroom. If really going on the ground and listening to the people, I think, is one of the biggest, teachings of leadership from any of these case studies. We have one case study which is with Red Sea Global, and they're an interesting case study because they're actually a hotel development company. This is not normally thought of as being, again, innovative or sustainable in any regard. And normally you go into an area and you have to do construction. Sometimes you have to move people out of that area, right? There's a lot of different social, environmental, and innovation challenges there. But they went into the area, they wanted to do things differently. They wanted to be more innovative. They went onto the ground and they listened to the local people. And this is, I think, a really surprising story that ends up being really interesting. The local people asked for two things from this company, and they seem completely unrelated to business, but they end up actually being their innovation hack. One of which they asked for a banana farm, and the other which they asked for sailboats, traditional sailboats, their cultural tradition sailboats, both of which for an executive seem completely unrelated. Like, great, that's wonderful, but that's not my job, right? But they went along with it and they invested in, hundreds of acres of agricultural land. And they also invested in these sailboats and trained the local people to use them. And what that ended up doing is they created a very unique farm to table experience at all of their hotel chains that actually elevated them and actually got them much higher rankings. And people were coming to their hotels specifically for their culinary, skills and things like that, and their farm to table experience. They also wanted to go for this very unique sailing experience that nowhere in the world you could experience at a high-end hotel. So that was something that was really interesting. It seemed to be not related to their business at all. They went along with it. They listened. And I think that's a huge part of listen. A huge part of leadership is not just listening, but having the vision to bring that, feedback you get from listening and putting it back into the business model. That's a true leader, where you actually listen to something that seems unrelated to your business and you listen to it and you say, okay, we're going to try to find a way that this fits with our business model. It ended up being very successful for the hotel brand, and they got so much higher ratings because of that. And people go to their hotel, not just for the location, they go to that specific hotel for those two experiences. So that's something that's a really interesting case study in that leadership, I think.
It's such a vital element in the leadership toolkit, that notion of listening. And
Yeah.
of course, you might argue for a pre-existing business, it starts internally, really being willing even to listen to your own teams that are potentially the ones representing the front line, and having a pulse on what the market is really doing, and what the market is telling them as a brand. Here's what we're thinking, here's
Yeah.
where we're going. Sadly, I can't even count the number of executives I've had experience with that aren't good listeners in that way.
Yeah.
But I will say the ones that now that you bring it up, I think about a short list of ones that I've always really admired, and they're very dear to my heart. That's an attribute they had. They were great, great listeners.
Yeah.
And part of it also blends with the idea of being curious and asking great questions.
Yeah.
That prompts the speaking and the communication to give you great insights and input.
Yeah, absolutely. And there has to be a huge amount of open-mindedness, because I think that, without kind of thinking and being open to a diversity of ideas, you're not going to be able to actually put those ideas that your team is telling you and put them into action, right? There's so many skills that have to happen to actually bring that and bring it into the vision. And I think that's a huge part of what we need to be educating our leaders to be able to do, because oftentimes they might even go and listen to people on the ground or listen to their stakeholders that have different experiences than they do, but they're not really able to implement it because they're not thinking out of the box. And that's the exact type of out of the box thinking that normally ends up helping the company survive and lead in the market.
Yeah, I love that. Well, let me ask you this. I know you don't really put yourself out there as a futurist, but what do you see coming down the road, or what is the market telling you that may be emerging next?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a huge part of this is risk management. I think that's a huge element of this. And we're starting to see this already with a lot of the products that are coming on the market. When you look at, for example, Atkins Realist, which is a huge construction company, they're in over, I think it's 150 or 160 countries where they're, implementing roads, bridges, buildings, things like that. They've already started putting out quite a few softwares for building managers and all types of organizations that have physical assets on the ground to be thinking about their risk management strategies and disaster planning and scenario analysis and things like that. I think that's oftentimes a very overlooked part of an investment strategy, but it's something that's so essential now, especially as insurance companies are pulling out of a lot of areas because they know disasters are just too likely. They're not even giving the insurance policies to a lot of small, medium-sized, and large businesses now. So we're going to have to be thinking very innovatively about how we're actually going to deal with these risk management strategies. And a true innovator is able to take that risk and find a product out of it. And those are the people who are going to be leading in the market, as they're saying, we have this, credible challenge ahead of us. How are we going to be able to profit from it? How are we going to see this as an opportunity? That's what a true innovator does, is they say, okay, there's a huge risk, there's a huge challenge. How can we make a product out of it? And we're starting to see that already with some leaders in the market. They're already starting to think about it this way. How can we release new products to meet these challenges?
You know, trying to collect my thoughts here. Sorry, folks. So many things that do come to mind. What do you see in service oriented businesses? And I'm thinking in terms of I'm doing a lot of work in what is traditionally called the home services space, but there's a certain degree, depending on the sector. For instance, in HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air, there's a kind of a roll-up phenomenon going. There's a lot of PE and VC money that's gobbling up these little local shops who have a good footprint and a good market share, and they're doing these roll-ups for these folks. But obviously, well, in that space alone, there's been a big shift because of the whole idea of moving away from Freon, because of the climate implications and some of the alternative coolants that are being used now that are more planet friendly and such. But any words to us on business owners who have those kind of businesses in their portfolio?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a challenge, and it depends on kind of what challenge, part of that challenge you kind of want some vision around. But I feel like one of the things that's true with all service businesses is that you really have to invest in people and you have to invest in those relationships. That's really the crux of it. I know that everyone says this, but it's something that's hugely important for the success of a service business. And even with the example of TaskUs, I think they're a great case study for any service business that's wanting to see some leadership in this regard, that's wanting to see innovation within the service industry. Because, one of the things that we often overlook is that when we lose a human being, when we lose, an employee, we often have to replace them at 30% of their annual salary. It normally takes to replace them. That's the cost it takes to replace them. It doesn't include, of course, the knowledge loss that ends up happening there. But when they invested, TaskUs invested more in their employees. They raised salaries, they invested in the best facilities, the best equipment, and really went all out in terms of really strategically investing in their teams. When they did that, they cut their turnover entirely. And so people weren't leaving, and they actually reduced their costs. So sometimes when you invest in your teams, you actually end up reducing costs in that way, and you actually end up building better relationships with your clientele. So I think one of the things that's always important when we're thinking about innovation in the service industry is always to thinking about how can we invest in the best people and how can we strategically invest in a way that actually enables them to do their work. Because anything to cut costs or to be reactionary to the market in that way is a downward trend. right? We have to be thinking forward. We have to be thinking in terms of leading, in terms of being an innovator. Otherwise, it's just a downhill road from there. So that's what my advice would be to service businesses in general. I think for that particular market, I think that there's always an importance of getting diverse income streams as part of any of these markets. It's really important for particularly that industry. I think in particular, you have to be investing in multiple income streams.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that as an observation. I totally agree. And as a executive coach and business advisor, that's what a lot of the work I do with these smaller businesses. We deal a lot on the notion of people and culture. Building a culture, particularly in the case of a acquisition transition where the owner, the big phenomenon we've got going on in this sector right now is a lot of the baby boomers who built these businesses are wanting to cash out and retire.
Right.
And they may not have a generational hand down, so they're putting the business on the market for sale.
Yeah.
It's a great opportunity for the next gen entrepreneur to come in there and take it over, and it's already cash flowing. You just have to move it forward. But by and large, I'm sad to say that one of the phenomenon that we run into a lot is that the founder owner who's now selling maybe didn't do everything they could have done to build that culture and that people investment and the brand loyalty. So what they'll tell you is, well, personnel's a pain in my butt. They're always turning over and all that. And it's like, well, look in the mirror. Why do you think that's happening?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're encouraging the new owners to really focus time, energy, and in your planning, put dollars aside for that bona fide development of a culture that people can identify with and join into. And it's interesting to me how seemingly contrarian that sounds to so many that are in that traditional sector that.
Yeah. And I think building culture is something that feels very elusive at first, but it ends up giving really tangible financial results. So it ends up being completely worth the investment. And one of the things I've noticed from the case studies in the book that have been really successful, specifically with culture, is that they often have these moon missions. And what I mean by that is they have a mission to not only lead in the market, but to completely change the landscape in a way that's meaningful to everyone on the ground. Interface, of course, is a perfect example of this because even though they're a traditional business that's a manufacturing business in Georgia, they're getting the best and brightest to come that are the youngest generation, which oftentimes the youngest generation normally hops jobs every 2 years. That's very common for what we're seeing with millennials and Gen Z. They don't stay at companies. That's not happening at Interface. Young, bright people come into the organization and they stay for decades. And that's what we've seen with every generation in that organization. The reason for that is because it's no longer about a paycheck for them. Because if it's about a paycheck, they'll just leave to a competitor with a 10% bonus at a drop of a hat, right? Because it's just about the paycheck. If you're making your business not about the paycheck at all, providing for their family is about providing this mission to the company. Right. So I think that that's something that's actually very essential for a lot of these businesses, especially during a transition phase where there's a lot of uncertainty. They have to be thinking about what's their moon mission. What is it that's going to really keep people? When we think about the original moon mission, there was no chance that those engineers who were designing that were ever going to switch to another organization, right? Because they had something greater than themselves that they felt they were a part of and they were motivated by. So it's important for these businesses on the ground when they're transitioning in this period of uncertainty, what is their moon mission? What is their legacy? And what connects not only resonates for them, but what also resonates for the people who are going to adopt the business, right? And that's where listening, I think, comes back in, right? You have to connect with people on that level, or else it's not going to end up being, coming back to longevity. It's not going to last.
Yeah. Well, great word. And on that note, Vanessa, I think we got to wrap this up. We're about up on time for today, but thank you so much for sharing this. If you will, tell folks the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book that has 60 case studies and 7 principles of all these successful businesses, it comes out next year. You can find it and sign up for any updates on it on my website, which is www.the-sustainability-experts.com. I would also really recommend to our audience that they follow us on LinkedIn. It's the Sustainability Experts is our title on LinkedIn. And that's because we have really interesting guests on our podcast. We've had Olympian Venus Williams, who also runs 3 environmental businesses. We've had the former head of USAID come on, who actually contained the Ebola outbreak and talked about leadership under crisis. We've had the former CEO of Inc. magazine, all very different people, all talking about how do you implement practical, innovative business advice, right? So it's very straightforward. It's mainly for a business audience. And you can connect with us there. So you can learn from us either on the podcast, you can connect with us. We always really love to collaborate with people, and that's a way that we can connect with you. Of course, we're on platforms. You can find us on YouTube, you can find us on Spotify, you can find us on all of those platforms, Apple podcast as well. But I would really recommend that the audience listens to us and follows us on LinkedIn, because that's the way I feel we can help you the best.
Great. Well, folks, as always, we'll have those links in the show notes and you'll be able to click directly from there. But one last time, Vanessa, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, folks, we are going to put a bow on this, wrap it up for today. And I do like to remind you, we do have a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out the archives, give us a thumbs up, thumbs down, whichever you prefer. But nonetheless, give us your comments and feedback. Look forward to hearing from you. But for now, we're going to say goodbye. Go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.